I heard her laugh before I saw her face. A high, sharp sound that sliced through the chatter of 40 guests, like a knife through paper. "Oh my God," she said, not even bothering to whisper. The old hillbilly actually showed up. Someone open a window. My chest locked. My hands, the same hands that had built a lumber business from nothing, went numb at my sides. I stood in the doorway of my son's engagement party in a room full of people who suddenly couldn't look me in the eye. I wanted to turn around. I wanted to walk back to my truck and drive the 4 hours home to my cabin in the mountains and never come back. But then my son was beside me. His hand closed around my wrist. Firm and steady. He leaned in so close I could feel his breath against my ear. "Dad," he said, barely above a whisper. "Don't move. Don't leave. In 48 hours, she's going to wish she never met this family." I looked at him. My boy, 34 years old, sharp as a tack, and standing there with an expression I'd never seen before. Not anger. Something colder. Something deliberate. Something that told me he'd been carrying a secret for a long time. I'm grateful you're here with me for this story. Before we go further, tell me, where are you listening from right now? What time is it where you are? Because what happened next changed my life forever. And I want you to hear every word of it. Let me start from the beginning so you understand how we got here. My name is Walter Keane. I'm 67 years old, and I've lived my entire life in the Blue Ridge Mountains of western North Carolina. Not the tourist side with the craft breweries and the bed and breakfasts. The deep side. The side where the roads turn to gravel and the nearest grocery store is 40 minutes away, and the mornings are so quiet you can hear the creek from half a mile off. My father built a sawmill on our property in 1961. When he passed, I took it over and turned it into Keane Timber, a logging and milling operation that supplies hardwood to builders and furniture makers across the southeast. It's not flashy work. My hands are rough. My back aches most mornings. And I've got sawdust permanently embedded in the creases of my knuckles. But that land, those 260 acres of old-growth forest and cleared pasture along the French Broad River, that's my life's work. My father's life worked before me. It's worth more than money. It's worth memory. My wife, Diane, I understood that better than anyone. She was a school teacher in the valley, quiet and steady, the kind of woman who could calm a room just by walking into it. We had 31 years together before pancreatic cancer took her. That was 5 years ago. I still set 2 coffee cups on the counter some mornings before I catch myself. We raised 2 kids. My daughter, Lillian, moved to Raleigh, married an accountant, built a good life. She calls every Sunday. And then there's my son, Nathan. Nathan's the one who stayed close. Not on the mountain, but close enough. He went to college. Got a degree in forestry management. Landed a position with a conservation firm in Asheville. Smart kid. Capable. But more than that, loyal. Every other weekend he'd drive up, roll up his sleeves, and work the timberline beside me. We'd eat dinner on the porch afterward. Barely talking. Just watching the light fade behind the ridgeline. That's how it is between a father and son who trust each other. Words aren't always necessary. 2 years ago, Nathan met a woman named Vanessa Caldwell. The first time he brought her to the mountain, I noticed everything. She arrived in a white SUV that probably cost more than my house. She wore boots that had never touched mud. When she stepped onto my porch, she looked around the way someone looks around a museum. Interested, but removed. Like none of it was real to her. Nathan introduced us, and she smiled. A perfect smile. Too perfect. The kind of smile that's been practiced in mirrors. "Mr. Keane," she said, extending her hand. Her grip was brief and cool. Nathan talks about this place constantly. I can see why. It's so rustic. Over dinner, she asked questions. Not about Nathan, not about our family, about the property, 260 acres. She repeated, tilting her head like she was doing math behind those green eyes. And it runs all the way to the river. That must be incredibly valuable. How long has your family owned this land? Walter, is everything in your name? Or is there a trust? Have you thought about what happens to all of this when you... Well, you know, at your age, it's important to plan ahead. Isn't it? I felt something cold settle in my stomach. That old mountain instinct. The one that tells you when the weather's about to turn, when a timber's about to crack, when something in the woods isn't right. It fired hard that evening. After she left, I pulled Nathan aside on the porch. So, I said, that woman didn't ask you a single question about yourself all night. Every question she asked me was about land and money. He gave me that look, that patient, slightly amused. Look, young men give their fathers when they think age has made them suspicious. Dad, she's just curious. She's not from around here. She's trying to understand our world. She's trying to understand our net worth. I said. He shook his head and hugged me goodnight. And I let it go, because I didn't want to be the father who ruined his son's happiness over a gut feeling. But that feeling never went away. It sat in my chest, like a stone, for 2 years. Then I met her father. Richard Caldwell was everything I expected, and worse. Dull, silver-haired, dressed like he'd walked out of a catalog. He ran a real estate development company out of Charlotte. The handshake he gave me was the kind that measures you. When his eyes scanned my flannel shirt and worn jeans, I could practically see the dollar signs scrolling behind his pupils. Walter, he said, smiling. Not Mr. Keane, just Walter. Like we were old friends. Like he'd already decided I wasn't worth the formality. Beautiful property you've got up here. Absolutely beautiful. You know, land like this. Especially riverfront. It doesn't come along very often. Vanessa's mother, Claire, was cut from the same cloth. Elegant and empty. She complimented my house, the way you might compliment a child's crayon drawing. Sweet and dismissive at the same time. That night I sat on my porch alone and talked to Diane. I do that sometimes. I know she can't answer, but it helps me think. Something's wrong with these people. I told her, I can feel it in my bones. But Nathan won't hear it. The wind moved through the pines. No answer. But I felt steadier. The engagement party was held at a boutique hotel in Asheville. Nathan had planned everything. White tablecloths, string lights, a live jazz trio in the corner. It was elegant in a way that surprised me. My boy had grown into a man who could handle himself in any room. I wore my best shirt, clean boots. I'd even gotten a haircut in town for the first time in months. I wanted to make an effort for Nathan, but the moment I walked through that door, I felt it. The shift. The way certain guests looked at me and then looked away. The way Vanessa's friends clustered together, whispering behind their wine glasses. I was an outsider in my own son's celebration. I found a corner near the bar and ordered a whiskey. My daughter Lillian appeared beside me within minutes. She'd driven in from Raleigh with her husband. You feel it too, she said. Not a question, like walking into a room where everybody knows something you don't. I've never trusted her. Dad. And her father gives me the creeps. We stood together. Two people watching the same slow-motion disaster. Unable to stop it. That's when I heard Vanessa's voice. She was standing near the appetizer table with her mother, a glass of champagne in her hand. Speaking in that careless way. People speak when they've decided no one important is listening. Oh my God. The old hillbilly actually showed up. Someone open a window. I swear he smells like pine sap and diesel fuel. How Nathan came from that, I will never understand. Claire laughed. 2 more years. Darling, that's all. 2 years, and we'll never have to set foot in those mountains again. The words hit me like a falling tree. Not just the insult, the plan embedded inside it. 2 years. We'll never have to set foot in those mountains again. My face burned. Several people nearby had gone silent. A woman I didn't know stared at her shoes. A man near the window coughed uncomfortably. The humiliation wasn't private. It was public. Performed. I set my glass down and turned toward the exit. I was done. Done with the party. Done with pretending. Done with watching my son throw his life away on people who saw us as nothing more than a business opportunity. That's when Nathan caught me, his hand on my wrist, his voice low and steady. Dad, don't move. Don't leave. In 48 hours. She's going to wish she never met this family. I stared at him. His jaw was set. His eyes were clear and hard. What are you talking about? Not here. Tomorrow morning. My apartment. 7 a.m. Can you trust me until then? Could I trust my son? I'd trusted him his whole life. But standing there with those words still echoing in my ears, trust felt like a rope bridge over a canyon. Thin. Shaking. The only way across. I trust you. I said, then stay. Smile. Shake hands. Let them think they've won. So I did. I stayed at that party for another 2 hours. I shook Richard Caldwell's hand and smiled. I kissed Vanessa on the cheek and congratulated her. I played the part of the oblivious old mountain man because my son asked me to, and every second of it burned. The next morning I drove to Nathan's apartment in Asheville before the sun was fully up. I hadn't slept. Every time I closed my eyes, I heard Vanessa's voice. The old hillbilly. Someone open a window. 2 more years. Nathan was already awake. Coffee was on the counter. And sitting at his kitchen table was a woman I'd never seen before. Mid-30s. Professional. With a laptop open and several folders spread out in front of her. Dad, this is Karen Lou. Nathan said. She's a forensic accountant. She's been helping me for the past 2 months. I looked from my son to this stranger and back again. Helping you with what? Nathan pulled out a chair for me. Sit down. Dad, this is going to take a while. He took a breath. And then he told me everything. 6 months earlier, Nathan had come across something he wasn't supposed to find. He'd been at Vanessa's apartment, waiting for her to get ready for dinner. When her laptop chimed with a notification, he glanced at the screen. An email from her father. The subject line read Keane property phase 2 timeline. Nathan knew he shouldn't open it, but something, that same gut instinct he'd inherited from me, told him he had to. The email laid it out in clinical detail. Richard Caldwell's development company had been tracking a state infrastructure project for years. A new highway connector was being planned through the western counties. The route hadn't been publicly announced yet, but Richard had contacts inside the state transportation department, and that route ran directly through our property. Our 260 acres of mountain timber and riverfront pasture, land I'd valued at roughly $3 million, was about to become worth $30 million or more once the highway project went public. The plan was simple. Vanessa would marry Nathan. Over the following 2 years, they would gradually convince me to transfer the property into a family trust that Richard's attorneys would draft with hidden provisions. By the time the highway announcement went public, the land would be legally under Richard's control. They'd sell to the state at peak value, funnel the money into their Charlotte development projects, and disappear from our lives. I found more after that. Nathan said, his voice tight. Emails between Vanessa and her father, going back over a year. Text message. A spreadsheet tracking our property boundaries and estimated values. They had surveyors on our land. Dad. People I thought were hikers. They were mapping our timber stands and riverfront footage, Karen opened a folder and slid it across the table. I've authenticated everything. Bank records, communication logs, property filings. They've done this before. What do you mean? Before. Karen pulled up another file. 3 years ago, the Caldwells targeted a family in Virginia. A retired coal mining family sitting on land near a proposed pipeline route. Same playbook. Vanessa got engaged to the family's eldest son. They started the property transfer process. But the son got suspicious and broke off the engagement before it was finalized. The family never pressed charges because they couldn't prove intent. This time, Nathan said, leaning forward, we can... How? Because I've spent the last 4 months recording everything. Nathan's voice was calm, but I could see the strain beneath it. The weight of what he'd been carrying. North Carolina is a one-party consent state. Every conversation where I was present. I recorded. Vanessa confessing the plan to me when she thought I was asleep after too much wine. Richard walking me through the trust documents and explaining how they'd be structured. Not knowing, I understood exactly what he was hiding in the fine print. Phone calls. Dinners. Everything. He pressed play on a recording. Vanessa's voice filled the room. The land is all that matters. Once the trust is signed over, my father handles the rest. Nathan will get a settlement. Enough to keep him quiet. And we move on. His father will be gone within a few years anyway. Old men like that don't last long once you take away the thing they love. I had to grip the edge of the table. Not from shock. I'd known something was wrong for 2 years. From the sheer coldness of it. Old men like that don't last long. She was talking about me the way you'd talk about clearing a dead tree from a lot. Nathan played another recording. Richard, this time, the highway announcement goes public in 18 months. We need that trust. Locked down within 12. Once the deed transfers, there's nothing the old man can do. By the time he figures it out, we'll be 3 states away with $30 million in development capital. And then a third. Vanessa again. Laughing. The best part is he actually likes me. He thinks I'm good for Nathan. That old fool has no idea. I sat there for a long time after the recording stopped. The kitchen was quiet. Morning light came through the window and fell across the table like it didn't know what it was, illuminating. What do we do? I finally asked. Nathan looked at me with those steady eyes. We end it. Publicly. At the wedding. Why publicly? Why not just go to the police now? Karen answered. Because we want the maximum impact if we go to law enforcement, quietly. Richard's attorneys will argue the recordings are out of context. They'll claim it was a misunderstanding, business negotiation, whatever story they can spin. But if we reveal the evidence in front of 200 witnesses, with a prosecutor already in the room, there's no spin. There's no private settlement. There's only the truth. Heard by everyone, I looked at my son, this man I'd raised in the mountains, who I'd taught to fell timber and read the weather and respect the land. He'd become something I never expected, not just my son, my protector. When I asked, Saturday, at the ceremony, right before the vows. I didn't sleep the night before the wedding either. I sat in my hotel room and talked to Diane again. Our boy's grown up. I told her, he's about to do something brave. I need you to be with us tomorrow. The silence in the room felt warmer than usual. The wedding venue was a converted barn outside Asheville. The kind of place that costs a fortune to look rustic. Iron chandeliers. Exposed beams. Wildflower arrangements on every surface. The Caldwells had insisted on the location. They wanted it to feel authentic. Mountain charm for their city guests. I arrived early. Nathan was already there. Dressed in a dark suit. Calm as still water. We stood together behind the barn for a moment. Just the two of us. Looking out at the mountains. You sure about this? I asked. I've never been more sure of anything in my life. Your mother would be proud of you. He didn't say anything, but I saw his eyes go bright for just a second. Inside, the barn filled with guests. The Caldwell side dominated. Friends from Charlotte, business associates of Richard's, women in expensive dresses who looked at the mountain scenery the way Vanessa had looked at my porch 2 years ago, fascinated and superior. On your side, it was quieter. Lillian and her husband, a few of Nathan's friends, some of my neighbors from the mountain, people who wore their honesty on their faces. I noticed a man I didn't recognize sitting in the third row on our side, mid-50s, gray at the temples, wearing a navy suit that fit him like someone who wore suits for a living. He sat very still, watching everything with an attention that seemed professional. I would learn later that this was Thomas Hargrove, an assistant district attorney. Nathan had briefed him weeks ago. He was there as both witness and officer of the court. The ceremony began at 3 o'clock. Vanessa walked down the aisle on her father's arm, glowing in white silk. Every inch, the perfect bride. Richard's smile was the smile of a man closing a deal. Claire dabbed at her eyes with a tissue that stayed perfectly dry. The officiant began the traditional words: love, commitment, honor. Every word felt like a lie wrapped in flowers. Nathan stood at the altar with his hands clasped in front of him. Still, patient, waiting. Nathan Keane, the officiant said, turning to my son, do you take this woman to be your lawfully wedded wife, to have and to hold, from this day forward? For better or for worse, for richer or for poor, in sickness and in health, to love and to cherish, until death do you part. The barn went quiet. 200 people held their breath. Nathan looked at Vanessa, really looked at her, and for 1 second, I saw something cross his face. That might have been grief. Grief for the woman she'd pretended to be. The future that could have existed if she'd been real. Then he turned to face the crowd. Before I answer that question, he said, his voice carrying clean and clear through the barn, there's something every person in this room needs to hear. Vanessa's smile froze. Nathan, what are you, please? He said, not looking at her. Everyone, direct your attention to the screen behind me. A large display had been set up behind the altar. The guests had assumed it was there for a slideshow of the couple's photos. Some of them had even commented on what a nice modern touch it was. Nathan pressed a button on a small remote in his hand. The screen lit up. Vanessa's voice filled the barn like ice water. The land is all that matters. Once the trust is signed over, my father handles the rest. Nathan will get a settlement, enough to keep him quiet. The reaction was immediate. Gasps. A woman in the front row covered her mouth with both hands. Someone behind me said, "Oh my God," in a voice barely above a breath. Richard Caldwell shot to his feet, his face draining of color. Turn that off. Turn that off right now. But there was no turning it off. The next recording played, the highway announcement goes public in 18 months. We need that trust locked down within 12. Once the deed transfers, there's nothing the old man can do. The barn erupted. Guests were standing now, some backing away from the Caldwell side as if fraud were contagious. Vanessa spun toward Nathan. Hervel askeu. Her face, a mask of fury and terror. Those are fake. She hissed. You fabricated those. This is insane. The third recording played. Her own laughter. Bright and cruel. The best part is he actually likes me. He thinks I'm good for Nathan. That old fool has no idea. A man near the middle of the barn stood up and pointed directly at Richard. You people are criminals. Every one of you. Vanessa tried to run. She grabbed fistfuls of her white dress and bolted toward the side exit. But 2 uniformed officers were already positioned there. They'd been stationed outside since noon, briefed by the DA's office, waiting for exactly this moment. Thomas Hargrove stood from his seat in the third row and addressed the room. My name is Thomas Hargrove. I'm an assistant district attorney. The recordings you've just heard constitute evidence of conspiracy to commit fraud, attempted grand larceny, and document forgery. All involved parties will be taken into custody. The officers moved quickly. Richard Caldwell was handcuffed near the gift table, his silver hair disheveled, his catalog-perfect composure shattered. Claire was escorted out through the main entrance, protesting loudly that she knew nothing about any of it. Vanessa was the last. She stood at the altar in her wedding dress, mascara running, her hands trembling. When the officer approached her, she looked at Nathan one final time. "You knew," she whispered. "This whole time, you knew. I knew from the moment I saw that email," Nathan said. His voice was steady but not cruel, just honest. "I gave you every chance to stop. You never did." They led her out through the barn doors into the afternoon sunlight, her white dress trailing across the gravel like a surrender flag. I sat in the front row and let the silence settle around me. Lillian was crying beside me. Not from sadness, from relief. The trial took place 4 months later in the county courthouse. The prosecution's case was overwhelming. The recordings, authenticated by audio forensic experts, the emails and documents, verified by Karen Liu's forensic accounting, the bank records showing money already being moved into shell companies set up by Richard's firm. But the moment that sealed everything was the testimony of a man named David Ashworth. He flew in from Virginia specifically to testify. 3 years ago, his family had been the Caldwell's previous target, a retired mining family. Land near a pipeline route. The same scheme down to the letter. Vanessa had gotten engaged to David's brother. They'd started the property transfer process before his brother realized something was wrong. David's testimony was calm and devastating. He described the exact same pattern. The charm. The property questions. The gradual pressure to restructure ownership. The hidden provisions in legal documents. My family lost 18 months and $200,000 in legal fees, fighting them off. David said, "We couldn't prove criminal intent at the time. But what Nathan Keane did, gathering that evidence, that's what we wished we'd been able to do." The jury deliberated for 5 hours. Guilty on all counts. Richard Caldwell received 12 years for conspiracy to commit fraud, attempted grand larceny, and document forgery. Vanessa Caldwell received 9 years for the same charges. Claire Caldwell received 3 years for her role as an accessory. When the judge read the sentences, I felt something I hadn't felt in a very long time. Not triumph. Quieter than that. Completion. Like a wound that had been open for years, finally beginning to close. Nathan sat beside me, and I put my hand on his shoulder. Neither of us said anything. We didn't need to. 3 months after the trial, Nathan came to the mountain on a Saturday morning. He stood on the porch where I'd stood with his mother 1,000 times, looking out at the ridgeline. And he said the words I'd been waiting to hear for 15 years. "I'm coming home. Dad, I'm leaving the firm. I want to run the timber operation with you." I wanted to say something profound. Something a father says in a movie at a moment like this. But all I managed was a nod and a hand on his arm because my throat was too tight for words. In the months that followed, we rebuilt. Nathan brought modern forestry techniques, sustainable harvesting plans, equipment upgrades that made the work safer without making it less meaningful. I brought 60 years of knowing this land, knowing which stands were ready to cut and which needed another decade, knowing where the soil was thin and where the creek flooded in spring and where the best timber grew thickest. We worked side by side the way we had when he was a teenager. Except now we were equals, father and son, building something together. And then there was David Ashworth's sister, Margaret. She'd come to North Carolina for the trial, and she'd stayed. At first it was just coffee with Nathan, then dinner, then weekends at the mountain. I watched them together, the way you watch weather building over a ridge, slowly, naturally, with a certainty that doesn't need to be rushed. She was everything Vanessa wasn't. Direct. Honest. She asked about Nathan's work, his dreams, his favorite memories of his mother. She never once asked about property values. They got married 6 months later, under the big hemlock tree, at the edge of our upper pasture. No ballroom, no string lights, just family and mountain air and words that meant exactly what they said. Lillian stood beside me during the ceremony, her arm through mine. Mom would have loved her. She said, "She does." I said, and I meant it. One evening after the wedding, Nathan and I sat on the porch. The sun was going down behind the Blue Ridge, painting everything in shades of copper and purple. The kind of sunset that reminds you why you chose this life. "Dad," Nathan said, "I need to tell you something." "What's that?" "That night, at the engagement party, when I grabbed your arm and asked you to trust me, that was the hardest moment of this whole thing. Not the wedding reveal. Not the trial. That moment, because I knew how much they'd hurt you. And I couldn't tell you why I needed you to stay. I couldn't explain yet. I just had to ask you to believe in me. I did believe in you. I know. And that's why it worked. If you'd left that night, if you'd confronted them, the whole plan falls apart. I needed you to trust me without understanding. And you did." We sat there as the light faded and the crickets started up in the woods below. I thought about Diane, about what she would have said if she'd been here. Something simple. Probably. Something true. "You're a good man, Nathan. I learned from the best." That's my story. That's what happened when a family from the city thought they could walk into our mountains and take everything we'd built. They thought I was just an old hillbilly too foolish to see what was happening. They thought my son was too naive to fight back. They were wrong on both counts. If you're listening to this and something in your life doesn't feel right, if someone's asking the wrong questions, if the smile doesn't reach their eyes, if your gut is telling you something your heart doesn't want to hear, listen. That instinct exists for a reason. It's kept people like me alive for generations. Protect what matters. Don't wait until the storm is already inside your house. And never underestimate the loyalty of a son who loves his father. My name is Walter Keane. This is my true story. And the mountains are still ours.